Hey guys, it's Matt. Chapter 33, the concept of the reality flush. I'm not going to make a big deal about the number. Nobody owns numbers. I was 33 years old once. I didn't stay indoors. Who cares? This expands upon the concept of the first principle of truth, where if one element of an official story is impossible, which has absolutely become my favorite, for lack of better words, my favorite, the inflated tire at the bottom of the North Tower. It's just, I'm going to say that 1,000 more times because it's just baffling to me. That gives away all of reality, but nobody around us seems to care about an inflated tire at the bottom of the North Tower. But then you can throw it all out, the first principle of truth. Then, after that, everything presented is bogus. Something happened, but I'm going to determine on my own what it is. I'm not going to do any more research as to what they tell me happened. First principle of truth. This is taking it to the next highest level, or to the end of the spectrum, the reality flush. Certain events, like 9/11 and others, are so monumental, so big, cross a gigantic threshold that you could pretty much throw out all of reality. Meaning, the building blocks on which you base the way the world works don't work anymore. And you almost have to start over. And I have a metaphor in the beginning here that takes a long time to develop, but I think it's important. And because it takes such a long time to develop, you'll remember it. And, without a good analogy or metaphor to attach some of these concepts to, they're easily forgotten. So I made this as interesting as possible. This is kind of in the book, I'm bringing this forward now. It comes a little bit later in the book, but it comes at a point in the book when people are really beaten down with all the bad news, and you just need a little bit of a break, a little bit of a lighter side exercise. Let me paint this picture or set this scene. It's December, and it's getting dark. Imagine you're standing on a street corner in Philadelphia trying to hail a cab. Just as the snow and sleet begin to fall outside the art museum, at the bottom of Rocky's steps, an old yellow cab comes around the corner. Your hand waves wildly to get its attention as the sleet and wind pick up. Luckily, the cab sees you and abruptly moves into the far right lane where the curb is accessible. As the cab drives towards you, you look through the glass of its windshield to size up the driver, but for some reason, all you can see are two hands on the wheel. You squint your eyes and scan the glass up and down, but you can't make out the cab driver's face. As he slowly stops in front of you, a tinted driver's side window slowly goes down, and you hear a raspy voice say, "Just a moment, please." In shock, you witness the hands of a headless body come off the wheel and reach over toward the passenger seat, where a tiny bald head lays on its side on stained leather seats. In more of a stunned bewilderment than horror, you instinctively take a step back from the curb as you watch the arms work to affix the head onto the body. "Okay," says the head. "Now we're ready to go places." There's a distinct satisfaction in the tone of voice it uses, almost like the head is excited to be reunited with the body. Instead of getting into the back seat, you turn around and run. Now let me ask all you truthers a really tough question. Was that a normal cab? I'll wait a while for your answer. No, you say? Well, why would you say that? How do you know? Did you need to do weeks of research after the encounter, considering all possibilities, before you're fit to declare that the occurrence was very strange? Did you have to start a Facebook page or a Reddit thread to see if perhaps headless cab drivers are more common than you may have thought? Maybe at 40 years old you just weren't aware of these friendly headless fellows competing with Uber. Again, I ask you if what you saw was strange. Again, you don't have to hesitate to say, yes, it was the strangest goddamn thing I ever saw in my life. But what if you remembered there was somebody standing down the block, and she was also looking to hail a cab? She witnessed exactly what you did as the cab drove up, but it didn't bother her in the slightest. Not only that, Since you didn't want the cab, which she could assess by you running in the opposite direction, she got into the back seat of the cab with a smile. Now, do you think there is something wrong with her, or is there something wrong with you? What if, when you got home, you called your best friend to tell him about your experience and he said, "What's gotten into you, man? I've been using the headless cab company, Sleepy Follow, for years. They're on TV right now." Then, in a panic, you turn on the news and there they are on Market Street in Philadelphia, the headless cabbies, protesting Uber. You figured you knew what was normal in this world, but no one around you sees this the way you do. The headless cabbies are no big deal to everybody around you. In a cold sweat, you sit down and try to relax. Calling your closest family member, your cousin says it's confabulation and you just misremembered. Of course you knew about the headless cab company for years. He swears you've used them before. Now you begin to doubt yourself, searching for evidence that will get you in line with what all the normal people around you believe. You'll play any mind game to convince yourself you're just like everybody else. In years past, didn't we hear about a headless horseman? And therefore, by logical deduction, headless carriage drivers certainly must have been employed in the 1800s. And the logical progression of that then is the headless cab drivers of today. I just didn't know about it. This is basically the situation we're in as we now glimpse the truth of this world. Mostly, we stand alone in a very strange world. We are of the few who stopped the cognitive dissonance at some point early on and stuck to our beliefs. No, headless cab drivers aren't normal, and I'm not going to go along with the crowd who says they are. Remember the kid in the movie that said, "I see dead people"? Well, that's nothing, kid. We see a whole lot worse than dead people in this reality, and nobody around us can see any of it. They see none of it. Again, why did we doubt ourselves? Performing this simple exercise yields the same result. When the cab pulled up, we immediately knew something was wrong. We didn't need to research it anymore. Why did we feel we had to spend time making a case and proving it to the people around us? It was a headless cab driver, for crying out loud. That speaks for itself. Or at least it should, in what we thought was reality. But that's not good enough, though, in today's world. When our friends find out we wanted no part in getting in the back seat with a headless driver, they think we're strange for showing such insensitivity. Some people on Facebook call you racist, although the headless drivers are of no particular color. Here's another manifestation or symptom of our predicament as truthers, in metaphor. After our initial shocking experience with the headless cab driver, we now notice the headless drivers all over the place. Why didn't we know about this all along then? Why didn't we notice? Now that we're aware of it, we see it everywhere. Just yesterday we drove to work and a headless cab pulled up and stopped at a light right next to us. The left hand gave us a friendly wave while the right hand stroked the head, laying in a cup holder. When we tell our friends about the cabbies, our best friends say, "I know all about those headless cabbies, but what the heck can I do about it? Can't change the world." We look at ourselves in the mirror thinking we're the ones who may be nuts. I think there are several important takeaways from this strange, long, but I think necessary analogy. First, we don't have to prove to ourselves over and over that what we witness in this reality is not normal by taking on endless research of it. By the very nature of what we observe, there's often nothing to research. If a headless driver pulls up, we don't need to see any more than that to realize our entire reality is not what we thought it was. You don't need to seek confirmation that your interpretation is normal, no matter what your friends and family believe. We can defeat the self-doubt and voices that pop up in our heads that suggest it's not fair to make a determination of what's normal based on just one headless cabbie incident. You need to see if it happens again. No, regarding a cab driver without a head, once is enough. If our friends and family can't see that there's something strange about headless drivers, then they'll never be able to see it, ever. So let's stop trying to convince them that something's wrong. When we observe something so monumentally strange in this world, so life-changing, we truthers have been naive enough to believe the madness ends with a small cab company in Philadelphia. And that's all there is to it. Sure, We'd like to think that Sleepy Hollow is a bizarre one-off case, and the insanity must end there. Surely, everything else in Philly except this cab company is completely normal. That's both wishful thinking and fallacious reasoning. Rather, the wise man and wise woman would say, if I'm just noticing for the first time that headless drivers are competing with Uber all over the city, it's likely the condition is not just confined to this particular area. We must then assume that many of the septibus drivers may have detachable heads, and therefore the conductors of the regional rail lines like the R5 detach their heads too, for very unsatisfying cigarette breaks. Even if it turns out not to be true, my assumption must fall on that side, not on the side that wants to believe the madness has to be isolated. If we think that, it's because we want to think that. No, the headless cab driver to the rational truther may likely be just the first floor of the insane asylum. Why should the strange situation be confined just to those who work in public transit? What does being headless have to do with delivering reliable transportation services? Shouldn't we assume other city officials, like the mayor, may also have the ability to remove their heads? For that matter, why does there have to be a geographic limitation on headless workers? It's logical then to assume it may be all over the country or even all over the world. I'm sure you can see where this is going. The moment you experience your first headless cab driver is like the moment you understood what 9/11 was all about, or that nobody went to the moon. It's a threshold cross that breaks down your entire reality, across the board, in all areas. We've been at this truth business for so long we've become habituated to the madness ourselves. Like the next fake event is no big deal, we're used to it by now. However, these things we see are monumental reality changers, many in and of themselves. Many are so massive, if examined closely, we have to toss out our assumption of what we thought was real and put the building blocks of what we thought life was all about in the baby's bathwater to be tossed out. We come to understand that these massive things can't be successfully perpetrated by, quote, regular men and women, like the buffoons you see on TV. Bush, Kissinger, Gates, the sock puppet Obama, Anderson Cooper, and the other cast of characters. If we know one major shooting is fake, then it's not wrong to assume that they're all fake, or at least the ones that lead on the front page of a newspaper or lead the evening news. The first rule of truth brings everything else along for the ride. If the U.S. didn't go to the moon, then what else comes along with that? Then there isn't a bunch of big-haired, shiny, happy people on the ISS playing their musical instruments and dressing up in gorilla costumes, is there? If there was an inflated tire in front of the North Tower, then we can't believe one thing about the entire story. If there was a scholarship established the very evening of Allison's death, that is our headless cab driver moment. We've seen enough, even if it's all we've seen. Must we keep researching the event? No. If we understand the Titanic incident took out the three most powerful people in the world opposed to the Federal Reserve, and J.P. Morgan himself didn't get on board, then I don't care to analyze the rest of the story at all. We have the right to immediately then declare the entire official story crap. Just from that one element? Yes, just from that one element. J.P. Morgan didn't get on board. 3 people opposed the Federal Reserve, went down to the bottom of the Atlantic. Do you need to see anything else? No. We know the beast that crafts this reality well enough now to do that. Then, I don't care about an iceberg. I don't care about lifeboats half filled or Captain Smith, Jack's drawings, or anything else that's probably put there in the story to mislead and confuse. This, friends, seems to be our situation. People who come around to see the hoax of the moon landing somehow try to isolate the headless incident and put a box around it mentally like it may be a one-off cab driver. They hope it's a single anomaly. Maybe just one time they screwed us. In all the other areas, it's just a loving government by and for the people. Even people in our own community use this fallacious reasoning. Okay, I'll admit that the moon landing was fake, but elections must be real, and history has to be real, And Bill Nye is just probably trying to get kids interested in science. And there really are shiny, happy people on the ISS, even though they would look like absolute hell after just 2 weeks of not sleeping properly, and the urine can't properly leave the body in 0G. Oh, I forgot. It's not 0G, it's 90% gravity, and they're just free falling around the Earth, which makes no sense. No, I'm sorry. If one body is snatched, to be safe, you should assume they're all snatched. Don't even approach Donald Sutherland. Why shouldn't that be our default today? A fake moon landing is no different than a headless cab driver. It crosses over into an area beyond the point of no return. It's too massive of a threshold crossed to explain it away with logical means calling forth what you thought were the foundation pillars of this reality. It's a headless cab driver. From our perspective, there are no more pillars of this reality to rely on. None. We need to look at everything independently and not use society's constructs to try to figure out other parts of society's constructs. It's trying to build on top of air. We need a whole new approach. I'm sure that now, even in the truth community, the script of society is now calling forth inside you, and what you want to tell me about compartmentalization with the space program, and I'm aware of all those scripts that run. No, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people can't be kept perfectly quiet for 40 to 50 years because they wish to bankrupt the Soviet Union, who had a fake space program as well, I guess. I'm sorry, even to address these scripts, where people talk to me about compartmentalization. I don't believe that's it. I don't believe that's that's a very basic way of explaining a reality we don't understand. But let's just say it is that. They were great compartmentalizers. They kept everybody in their own little box. Well, think about it. Think about it very, very closely, all the way back to the terminus. That level of planning is not possibly human. People at your work can barely organize a conference for 50 people going to San Diego for a week. And we all assume that just regular people kept 100,000 others working completely in the dark. People working for 400 different government contractors completely in the dark of what was not going to happen on the moon. Just explain it away as compartmentalization. But no, my work screws up sending 50 people to San Diego. Either way, it's a reality breakdown. A mega fraud that crosses a certain threshold breaks reality apart on its own. If the moon landing was fake, then probably almost everything's fake. If any one of these major thresholds are crossed, it's like pulling out one leg of a three-legged reality stool. Everything else just crumbles, no matter how many legs there are. I'm saying that if just one of these thresholds are crossed, a major threshold, you can throw out the rest of your entire reality. No, this seems like a stretch, but give me a moment to explain. This is why I have accused all of us, not for being crazy in our observations, but for not going far enough or thinking big enough. And when you think that big, it appears like crazy thinking. But that's the only way to get close. For years we tried to quarantine each one of these frauds while always preserving the rest of our worldview reality the best we could. Why did it take us so long to see what's so obvious? If something as massive as the moon landing is a fraud, or we see the massive 9/11 ruse, how could we possibly then have believed voting, for example, was real? Even if you were stuck at the kindergarten level conspiracy and think JFK was just taken out by the deep state in support of the Fed, or taken out by the military-industrial complex in support of the propagation of the Vietnam War, well, even if you believe those things, we should have been able to see that the event can't stand in isolation. But even that breaks down almost everything else around it. For example, how could what happened in Dallas, or how could what have happened in Dallas, allow us to think that voting was real? Applying just a pinch of common sense, it all starts to break down. So let me get this straight. Dark elements of the permanent government or deep state took out JFK and confused the situation so perfectly for 50 years there are still 10 different theories on what actually happened, including mine, that no one was killed. But even if you believe that's radical or out there or impossible, that does not change what I'm saying here. Just think about it. Either way, they perfectly organized the confusion for 50 years, but these same groups are just going to let elections happen naturally and allow real votes to be counted. And they'll allow real voice of the people to come forth through elections. But they perfectly crafted the JFK confusion. What was the mob? RFK was going after mobsters. No, it was Cuba because of the pay of pigs. No, it was the Fed. He was going to end the Fed. No, it was the military-industrial complex. And it's still, in 50 years, the confusion that was put out, nobody, in terms of believing somebody was actually killed, not one of these theories has risen up to prominence. That's how well they mastermind the confusion. But anything that's that powerful, anything that could completely, turn reality 180 degrees, no, that entity would have no effect on voting. Over here, we all just vote and it's all normal and people really count real votes and the voice of the people shines through the democracy. No, if one element of reality breaks down that's crossed a certain threshold, then you flush all of it. And I haven't even gotten to the title of this video, but we're getting there soon. I remind you, if your cab driver removes his head while driving you, there is something amiss with the entire cab company. That's not real hard to put one and one together. But in analyzing these major fraud events, we don't do that. There is no need to spend an entire decade researching the 10 or 12 major reality presentation frauds like 9/11. If we see just one of them as a hoax, we can toss all of reality out on its ass. On September 12th, 2001, we should have started over and handed out a new set of core beliefs to each other. 9/11 just happened? September 12th? Or whenever we came to the conclusion that the entire story is completely ridiculous, whatever our core beliefs were, throw them all out. But we still tried to hold on to as many of them as we can, or we could. Why? If we're at the point where we know with certainty that 19 hijackers weren't involved in 9/11. We know the troop surge in Vietnam came after a staged event, that the Osama bin Laden story is bad pulp fiction. Nobody went to the moon. We know that Captain Hook was a massive staged event. We know the stock market is a digitally manipulated video game, and our history, like what happened to the Titanic, is completely false. If we know all that, then the threshold has been crossed many times over. Once you get to the point we are now, throw it all out and start over. Why are we building reality assumptions onto the back of the existing fraudulent reality? That's like trying to build a house onto the foundation of leftover foam from one of Marco Rubio's bubble parties. At this point, I would be ignorant to assume that anything is real as my default, as my first choice. Okay, we've hopefully learned too many lessons. When a bang bang event comes onto the news, what's our default now? Default is, it's probably absolutely fake. Been burned too many times. That's our default. Where 10 or 12 years ago, these events happen and we of course assumed the news had integrity. It was real. This is good. We've come about 180 degrees, but most of us haven't applied that to other areas. So if just one major threshold is crossed in one major area, it's illogical to assume the insanity that the world presents and the fraud is isolated. If one major thing is completely a threshold breaker, it's not isolated. You can then just say everything's a ruse, as it would have to be. What kind of doctor sees the symptoms of a runny nose and thinks the virus is isolated to the nasal passages? We know if the nose is runny and the person feels like hell, then the entire body is likely infected with virus. Sometime after September 12th, or on whatever day we finally saw it, we should have known our entire reality was infected with virus, and not assumed our problems were confined to just Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld. If you believe 3 skyscrapers fell just so the military-industrial complex companies can continue to make money from the government contracts, then congratulations. You've successfully isolated the virus in your mind. You've put the evil of this world into solitary confinement and separated it like Britney Spears does to her multiple personalities. You're a doctor, then, who thinks the flu virus is not just confined to the nose, but specifically to the left nostril. Think about this. There are actually a few Democrats who voted for Obama in 2012 who could actually see 9/11 the way you and I can see it. Albeit, there couldn't have been many, but there were probably actually a few. They just went off to the polls and actually believing Obama could be legitimately elected in a world where 9/11 actually happened. That's like seeing the demon from Fantasia rise up out of the Notre Dame fire, fly up into the air while beating its leather wings, and still planning to take your kids to the soccer game. This critical threshold, and passing it, deserves a name. How about this? The reality flush. When did your reality flush happen? It's like the term kind of like escape velocity, or Max Q, the term the frauds at SpaceX stole from the movie Armageddon. Oh, did they maybe get it from the Apollo missions? And real rockets? Oh, what's the difference? I'd rather use a simple explanation called the point of no return to describe a reality flush. After our first reality flush, we should have been honest and realized we were long past the point of no return. Reality simply can't be what we thought after our first reality flush experience. But what did we do? We spent time analyzing the next event, forgetting the 10 before it weren't real, but assuming this next one might be. We all hoped the satanic fraud could be isolated to just a few things, and perhaps the loving government will return with the Trump presidency and QAnon. No, guys, the reality flush flushes all things. Like the bowl will take everything down. Anything you throw into the bowl but a brick will go be sucked down that vortex, and that's what we should have learned at the moment our threshold was passed on our first reality flush. But we're just seeing that now, better late than never. Using World War I as an example, most in this community now can eventually see that the assassination of one Archduke asshole, Franz Ferdinand, is not capable of leading to a world war. World wars don't happen unless they've already played both sides, and they want world wars to happen. Not because one guy gets winged in a convertible. The breakup of the village people was more likely to cause a world war than what happened to Franz Ferdinand in the Austrian-Hungary Empire. That should have been a big enough threshold for all of us to flush the toilet. But it wasn't. It took us truthers about 10 more years of research to understand that every aspect of World War I was a giant fraud, and a fraud that keeps spreading outward, even through today. Where's the reality flush, you ask? Well, the stinky bowls are all around you. The reason for the war itself was cooked up, fake. The outcomes were fake, meaning rigged, like the Sykes-Picot Treaty that artificially created the dividing lines on the world map for what the Middle East looks like today and laid the way for Western puppets like the House of Saud. The end of the war is cooked up, as the license plate on the Archduke's car actually codes exactly into the armistice date, with the Treaty of Versailles signed at Versailles but in the Hall of Mirrors. Oh, what a coincidence. Just like someone else's reality flush shows me that the date of the fake Bin Laden raid in Pakistan codes exactly to 9/11. Let's look more closely at one of the ripples that moved across the bowl of the original World War I reality flush. If oil is a fossil fuel, where did all the fossils come from in Saudi Arabia creating that ocean of oil under Riyadh and Jeddah? The movie Lawrence of Arabia showed us that these Saudis were just pissed off Bedouins on camels with curved swords. The West then just let them sit on a few $1 trillion of oil, and they all withdrew after World War I. Laughable. Let's finally learn our lesson. If the story is even remotely attached to a prior reality flush, it's all part of the same tidy bowl reality flush, so no research is necessary, no further research. Just consider it's part of the same flush. Let that sink in. No further research should be necessary. And where are you going to go do your research anyway? Snopes? FactChecker.org? Wikipedia? Hey, Matt, what do you think about Trump posing with the Saudi minister touching that creepy crystal ball? What was that all about, Matt? There's no point in trying to determine what the hell it was all about. For once again, we can just use the House of Saud and trace it back to our original reality flush, which can trace back to the start of World War I. Once you flush reality, my friends, you see that it's a very big bowl, and most things get sucked into the same septic tank together. Reality flushes are like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. They all relate to one another. Once you flush your reality, the matrix code all around you becomes easily visible. Maybe you can't read all of it, but you can see the bad code that no longer jives with common sense, where everyone else around us wears the veil and they see no code, of course. Using my favorite example, those that have performed the reality flush can not only immediately see that Chris Hurst couldn't have established a live scholarship fund for the sake of his dead fiancée the day of her death, a reality flushing veteran will see that he's more likely a gay man that wouldn't know what to do with her if you put both of them in a broom closet together naked. If you've officially flushed your reality and are no longer holding on to the turd pillars it uses to prop itself up with, then there's a new level of clarity and vision for all. You may say to yourself, wow, how strange. With 30,000 video cameras in lower Manhattan on the day of 9/11 ready to shoot, there are only about 5 decent images of some gray thing hitting the South Tower. You might say, well, if they can remaster Gone with the Wind and remaster The Wizard of Oz shot in the 30s, so when I watch on my 4K television they're crystal clear, well, why don't we ever get a remastered image of something hitting the South Tower? Perhaps there's nothing to remaster. After a reality flush, it kind of hits you that the technology of 1930 probably wasn't as good as 2001. So in a way you could say like a reality flusher is somebody that's also dropped veils. Yes, when one sees a flushed reality, it has one laughing at a lot of things. Like the most important equation in human history is just 3 letters. E equals mc squared. Think about it. Every single Edward Michael Cartwright, EMC, in the name, the initials. Every single Edward Michael Cartwright and every Earl Matthew Chesterfield and Eddie Marcus Charles and every other permutation of the name with the same 3 letters in the initials. All they had to do was just write a little 2 by mistake after their initials, and the biggest riddle in the cosmic universe would have been solved by mistake. Well, what are you saying then, Matt? You saying E equals mc squared is fake? And it really wasn't the basis for all nuclear testing and the nuclear weapons, and science hasn't used E equals mc squared in thousands of different ways. And hey, I don't know if it's fake. I don't care if it's real. All I'm saying is this reality delivers a script. On the base level of reality itself, it delivers a script. I don't care how useful E equals mc squared is. I don't believe, if things were real, that the greatest mystery in all the universe is 3 letters. No, I believe reality delivers a script, no matter how real E equals mc squared is. It's a reality giveaway. And wasn't it nice for the universe to put its entire fabric and essence of being into an equation that any second grader could do? Wasn't that nice of the universe to do that? You know, I watched that horrible movie, the reenactment of The Time Machine, the H.G. Wells reenactment. I guess it was 2003 or 2004. I hate that lead actor. Can't stand that guy. Some interesting parts, but he's got this chalkboard. He's got all these calculations on the chalkboard. He needs a ladder to get up to them. And then we see Matt Damon in Goodwill doing his hunting. And he's got all these equations all over the place. And you and I couldn't do one of them. We couldn't do none of it. But the universe's most revealing mystery is E equals MC squared. I don't care what it is. It's a reality breakdown. Yes, once a reality flusher learns that the bank makes up the money about 5 minutes before they hand you the cashier's check for your mortgage, then they see there's no reason to do 100 hours of additional research on the stock market, for example, a related element in the financial system. What they do know to do is then to flush the entire financial system down the bowl. One massive threshold of fraud means the entire thing's a fraud. Of course, for anyone who wants to waste the time to look into these things, they see that it's a system based entirely on zeros and ones, the stock market, based entirely on zeros and ones, has completely sidestepped a real world where prices are actually set through the honest dealings of price discovery that goes along with supply and demand. For heaven's sake, there was something called a flash crash in 2010, where the computers apparently just glitched and wiped out a few $100 billion in about a tenth of a second. And people continue to trust their entire life's work to the HAL 9000. The same HAL 9000 is probably devising ways to trap you outside the airlock, and it's already killed those of us in cryosleep. Guys, going away from the book for a second, I don't think that flash crash was a glitch. I think it was almost an announcement. Maybe it was the moment when the entire global financial system went manipulated digital. Literally went AI supercomputer. Maybe it was they have. I mean, they have to show us. There's also somebody sent me that creepy speech that Christine Lagarde made, which could have been the announcement of moving on to the new platform, of completely digital, of completely an entire world financial system managed by supercomputers. No doubt about it. The flash crash could have been kind of a mini announcement because we know they have to show us. Verizon went down 17% in a few seconds. I mean, just obviously, there's no way movements like that could happen if anything was real. Was it an intentional announcement? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Okay, this could go on and on with 1,000 more examples, so let's wrap it up. Basically, it took all of us about 10 years, give or take, for a few people that saw things more quickly, when we should have all realized in about 10 seconds after our first reality threshold was passed that one reality flushing event flushes all turds at the same time, essentially. If a woman with a hiked up skirt and high heels is seen going in and out of a Victorian apartment for 10 years in a row as men come out buckling up their belts, guess what? It's a whorehouse. You don't need to stake the place out with surveillance for 20 years or catch anyone in the act. How terrible would that be to test your hypothesis? The good news is we don't seem to need the self-validation in the same way that we used to. We are more apt these days to trust our instincts and certainly not to look to the people around us to validate them. And we're getting away from looking to the other people in our community on YouTube to validate them. Who cares who agrees? Once you're a reality flusher, your opinions are valid on their own. Okay? However, overall, I still don't think we allow ourselves to go far enough, to think big enough, to think crazy enough to actually take the next step. And that's what we have to work on. Thanks, guys.